in his book called Undaunted Courage. Stephen Ambrose traces Lewis and Clark's expedition in the early days of 1804. And in doing so, he charts the course for almost 2 years, chronicling their journey through uncharted territory and the ways in which they dealt with unbelievable obstacles. Things like hunger, heat exhaustion, fatigue, desertion, problems with morale, hostile enemies, serious illness, and even death. After almost 2 years of facing and overcoming these and other obstacles, he writes of how they finally reached the Continental Divide. And according to the best advanced information that they had, their expectation was that once they crossed over the divide, that they would face about a half-day's worth of travel, at which point they would come to the headwaters of the Columbia River, which would subsequently float them down gently to the Pacific Ocean. That was their expectation. So they arrive at the Continental Divide, and Ambrose tells of how Meriwether Lewis leaves the team behind, and he climbs up to the bluffs to look at what's on the other side. Now, what he believes he will find is a gentle sloping valley into the waters that will take him home. But does anybody know what he finds instead? No. The Rocky Mountains. He is the first American citizen to see what many of us have now seen, the Rockies. And when he realizes is that before they get to the water, they're going to have to scale the mountain. Now imagine for a moment that you are him, and you are leading this expedition. What in this situation do you do besides freak out? Besides lose heart? Besides become incredibly discouraged? They've been traveling for 2 years. He thinks he's home free. The finish line is right in front of him. He gets to the top of the bluffs and he sees the biggest obstacle of them all. What do? What do you say to the little team when you return back that's waiting for you to come down from the bluffs and let them know what they're about to face? What do you find within you that is able to communicate to them some sense of hope? How do you tell them what you saw? And how do you find the reserves and strength you need to inspire them to sacrifice just a little bit longer to get where you thought you already were? Well, you and I might not be facing Rocky Mountains today, but I would say in some sense we have our own set of them. We've been traveling on journeys in our lives for some period, and we have hit spots relationally, financially, spiritually, where we are facing obstacles that seem larger than what we really believe we have the reserves or strength to deal with. We're at the foot of the mountain, and we just can't comprehend how we're going to scale this thing and get to the place that we want. And some of us are tired, and some of us are struggling, and some of us are discouraged, and some of us are depressed, and some of us are angry, and some of us are a whole range of other emotions because we're in this place that we are really not wanting to be. And we've been there far longer than we wanted to be. And we're looking at the mountain, and we just can't find what we need, the hope, the strength, the endurance to take the next step up. Well, this morning, what I want to do is give you some instruction from the Apostle Paul, who writes a letter to a church of people who are facing similar Rockies in their own life. If you have a Bible and you want, you can turn with me to the book of Philippians, Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. This letter is written by Paul to the church probably that he was closest to, the church who had supported him the most financially and spiritually. They had been with him. But there had hit this space in their life where, for whatever reason, they had lost touch with him. They weren't able to find him in his travels, and so they had not been supporting him like they once did. Also, they were starting to fracture internally. There were people there who were leaders who were starting to fight with each other and not fight fair. And as they were dealing with these Rocky Mountains in their lives, Paul gets word and he writes to them. And he writes this letter, which is in large thank you letter. But he begins to address these people at this church, specifically in what they should do in dealing with the Rocky Mountains in their lives. It's very practical instruction, and it's instruction that I want to share with you. The last part of this letter that I want to share with you begins in verse 8 of chapter 4. He writes, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, let me say one more thing as I close this letter. For your thoughts, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right. Think about the things that are pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all that you learned from me and heard from me and saw me doing, and the God of peace will be with you. How grateful I am and how I praise the Lord that you are concerned about me again. I know that you have always been concerned for me, but for a while you didn't have the chance to help me. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to get along happily, whether I have much or whether I have little. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do everything with the help of Christ who gives me strength." You know, often when I face adversity or struggle, or I hit places in my road where there are just problems, more problems than I can seem to deal with, I oftentimes, at least initially, tend to fix my mind on the size of the problem. Don't you? I mean, perhaps even right now where you are, there's an issue that you're dealing with. Perhaps you've been dealing with it for some time, and the thing hasn't gotten any smaller. In fact, it's probably gotten larger. And the reason it's gotten larger, if it has in fact done so, is because when you fixate on something, when you obsess upon something, it begins to shrink your perspective. That thing becomes really all that you see. So when normally you have a scope that takes everything in, the good, the bad, the happy, the sad, you can see it all and have an appreciation for even those parts that maybe are difficult but are part of your journey. Once you begin to fixate and focus on the problem, on the mountain, what happens is your perspective, it naturally shrinks, right? So then once your perspective shrinks and you begin to look at and think about and obsess on your problem, what happens is that you begin to marginalize the Spirit of God in your life. It's not that God's Spirit disappears or leaves you. God said, "I will be with you always." Those are the words of Christ. "I will never leave and forsake you." So there is not this place where we think, well, God was once upon a time with me, but I must have done something wrong, and so now He hates me, and He's left me to this fate, and it's a miserable one, and I don't even know what to do. And we start to get all these things in our head about the nature and character of God, about the size of our problem, and it just begins to funnel down, and we fixate and obsess on it, and it becomes more and more difficult, and we become discouraged and even depressed. That's what happens. And so Paul knew this about the people that he was writing to. This is a very human tendency. It's very universal in all of us. So Paul says, hey, listen, I'm not trying to oversimplify your problem, but let me give you some instruction that might be helpful. Because, by the way, does anybody know where the Apostle Paul is writing from? Prison. He is an old man, he is in prison, and he's on death row. He is awaiting his execution. So when he writes these things, he is writing not from a place of great joy in the terms of his circumstances being what he wants them to be. Our circumstances will wax and wane. Sometimes there will be good things going on in our life, and sometimes there will be bad. And sometimes we'll have longer stretches with both. But the truth of the matter is, our circumstances and our situations, they're constantly in fluctuation. So we can't wait until we get to the point where, because oftentimes we think this, oh, when I get to here, then my life will be, but we never get to here. Here keeps getting moved out. Because even when we get to the place that we thought we wanted to be, we're never really content in that spot either. We're difficult people. You know it's true. So when Paul writes these words, he says, now, dear brothers and sisters, let me say one more thing to you. Fix your thoughts on what is true. Focus your thoughts, not on the problem, not on the size of the issue you're dealing with and have been dealing with for weeks and months and years. He said, I want you to turn it around you. This is going to be important. This isn't like, don't worry, be happy, Hakuna Matata, happy life for you, This is a serious discipline where I take my thoughts and I fix them on a certain specific thing. What is that thing? Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right. Think about things that are pure and lovely and admirable. Think about those things that are excellent and worthy of praise. What if in the moments of facing the Rocky Mountains in your lives, instead of focusing on what seems so monumental, so difficult, so problematic, you could actually fix your mind, focus your mind on that which is good, and that which is true, and that which is pure and lovely and admirable? Do you think that if you were able to discipline your mind to do that, that it would change anything about your perspective? I think that it would. You say, well, I don't know how to do that. And I will say to you, I believe that if you know how to worry and be stressed out, you can meditate on the opposite. Right? If you can be afraid and be worried and be stressed out all the time, you're meditating. You're just meditating on the wrong things. It's really true. And so I'm not saying that if you fix your mind on what is good and true and right, that your problem is going to go away. I'm saying you're going to see it differently. And so rather than looking at that mountain and being like, oh my God, I can't do that anymore. I can't go up not one other step. You will look at it and say, man, I got a great adventure in front of me. I wonder what God has in store for me with this one. Because you lose heart along the journey in your adventure once you start to focus on all the things that are wrong. Right? My leg hurts. I can't do that. I've been here before. I knew this was going to happen. And our mind starts to go to these places where we spiral down. And it doesn't really work well for us, does it? It doesn't at all. There are many things about our circumstances in life that you and I cannot change. There's a lot of stuff that is beyond our control. Do you know that? Do you know what is within your control? Your response to the situations in your life, your attitude, your choices, your actions. I say it often, what kind of person do you want to be? And what kind of life do you want to have? You get to choose. You get to choose. We don't need to. We can blame other people for all the things that are wrong in our life, but does it work? Does it help you have a better life? No. Some of us started from a very bad place. We've been trying to work out of a hole from almost the day we were born. That is an ever-present reality for us. We don't pretend that it's not so, but we don't use it as an excuse for us not to be the best that we can be. Nobody will ever ask you to be somebody else. No one. Certainly not God. But God will require of you that you take the 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents that He entrusted to you, and you steward them wisely, and you run the race for as long as He gives you breath in your body to run. Paul is sitting on death row, and he is telling these folks, listen, here's what I've learned along the way. If you stop worrying about all the things you can't control and fix your mind on that which is good. Have you ever tried to do that when you're in the middle of a problem? Probably haven't tried to do it very much. It's really hard initially, but like anything else that you practice over a period of time, you get better at it. When you do something the first time, you're lousy at it, right? And a lot of times, because we're lousy at it, we just give up. Well, I knew I couldn't do that. Well, how about try again? And again, and again, and again, and again. Have you ever, Paul is saying, have you ever thought about, in the midst of your biggest crises, thinking about that which is good? Like 5 minutes in your day, just sitting down and thinking, gosh, what is good in my life? What is true? What is pure? What is admirable? What is worthy of praise? What if you did that every day? What if every day, you said, you know, I'm going to take 10 minutes as I start my day. I'm just going to focus on good stuff, true stuff, pure stuff. Do you think that would impact you in any way, shape, or form? Do you think, I mean, seriously, do you think that it would? Why wouldn't you do it? Now you have no excuse for ignorance. And now you know there's something you can do in the tough spot in your life rather than focus on all the things that aren't right. Okay? So now Paul has enlightened us to a strategy to deal with issues that we don't want to deal with. Okay? So I've given you a tool from the Scriptures. Now, when you're struggling with stuff in your life, listen, I'm not minimizing your problems at all. The Rocky Mountains are the Rocky Mountains. And your obstacles are very real and very difficult. I wouldn't minimize them, not for a second. But what I want you to do is not lose heart at the bottom of it and give up. And live a shell of the life you could have had if you would have just gained heart and took instruction from the Scriptures and moved forward in a way where God would lead you on the adventure of your life. God often leads us through the worst things in our lives to bring us the best. I have found it to be true over and over and over. And while I would never choose those things, God can redeem those things and lead us out and through. And that's what I want us to think about as we're moving through this portion of the Scriptures today. As he gets towards the end, he says to them, he says, listen, I've been to the top and I've been to the bottom. I have been hungry, not knowing where my next meal was going to come from. And I have had a full belly. I know what it's like to be rich, and I know what it's like to be poor. He said, I've learned the secret of being content in all things, and I'm passing it on to you. And he moves on to finalize his words by saying, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Now listen, let's take this in the right context. I used to, when I was a kid, dream about being a major league pitcher. I wanted to be on the Boston Red Sox. I still sometimes fantasize about that. I'm 45 years old. I think my dream has quickly faded. I'm never going to have the lead in a Broadway musical. It would be great. I'm never going to write the next great American novel. These are things that at some point in time along my journey that I thought it would be really cool to do. What Paul is not saying is you can do whatever you want, just try hard at it. Some of us have certain gifts for certain things. And some of us will be able to do things that others cannot do. He's not saying you can do whatever you want, just have Christ in your life. What he's saying is, with Christ in your life, you can face any struggle, any adversity, any problem, and you can be more than a conqueror. You can overcome and move through and accomplish things that you scarcely would have imagined. Because when you live abiding with Christ in a relationship with Him, He enables you to have the reserves that you need to face your greatest fears and to overcome them. What happens when the Spirit of God gets marginalized in your life is that what gets enthroned in your life is the spirit of fear. And the spirit of fear never really empowers you to live your best life. And there are many followers of Christ, many believers, many people of faith who are overwhelmed by their fears on a daily basis, and it just shouldn't be. He says, if you would just stop fixating and obsessing and focusing on all that is wrong in your life, it might be that God would open your mind to the possibilities of what is good and true and right and pure and admirable. And as you see those things, you give Him praise and your heart expands and He has room to lead you into the next place of your journey. Now I want to give you a picture of this. This is a very poignant picture. I showed this to those of you who were here about 5 years ago. I was wondering when I last showed this clip. It is perhaps the most impressive thing that I have ever seen and shown you guys. This is not only a powerful human drama that you will see, it is a picture of what happens when one allows the Father to take control and to lead one on the adventure of a lifetime. This is the story of a man named Dick Hoyt and his son Rick Hoyt. Dick has now retired from his races. He's about 75 years old now. But he was racing up into his 70s. He had had a series of heart attacks, and he is just an impressive man. His son was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. He didn't get enough oxygen to his brain, and the doctors told him when he was young that he was never going to do anything more than a vegetable. They told him to put him away into a special place, that there was really little or no hope. But what they didn't understand when they looked at their problem was the spirit of the man. Because Rick would go on to graduate from Boston College University. And he and his father had the experience of a lifetime as they learned the joy of racing across the country in ways that would blow you and I away. The picture you're going to see is of the World Championships in Kona. It's the Ironman triathlon. That means 3 parts to the race. There's 2.4 miles swimming in the ocean. There's 112 miles riding on a bike. And you wrap up the race with a marathon, 26.2 miles. I want you to see a picture of not only a human drama, but of what could be as the Father leads us into the adventure of a lifetime. Guys, if you will show this, we're going to close with this.